we have Mr. Jim Randolph, who is with Newmark, and he joined the company in 1999 to head up a new division of real estate services. He's an executive vice president with over 30 years of experience leasing and selling of retail real estate. Prior to joining Newmark, Jim was the regional director of retail services for CBRE. What is that? Caldwell Banker and Richard Ellis, I guess it stands for, managing the entire Bay Area. So suffice to say, without going through the long list of accomplishments, projects, and activities, Jim's got the experience, and we're very, very happy to have you here today, Jim, to share that with us.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Jim Randolph, and I hate to say it, but it's more than 30 years. It's 40 years. And my specialty is retail leasing, tenant rep, and retail development. How did I get here in the South Bay? I graduated from Washington State, and I was in hotel and restaurant and went to work for Marriott, and they moved me down here to open up Great America and the hotel. So that's how I ended up in the South Bay, and I've never left. Because of my time in the South Bay, I was at the grand opening for Valco, and I was at the grand opening for Sunnyvale Town Center. Just to give you some time and place. I think it's important to kind of explain to you the current projects I'm working on. A number of them you'll be familiar with. And Main Street was, I was involved in the original planning, leasing of Main Street. I'm also involved in El Paseo right now in our redevelopment, which we just went through re-entitlement, where we have basically taken 9 acres of the center and we're going to convert it into housing and future retail. I'm also involved in Dublin, downtown Dublin, which is an area, it's an 18-acre site in downtown Dublin that's been studied for probably 6 or 7 years. The ULI studied it, but this is where Dublin wants to create their downtown. So I've been involved as a consultant with the owner and the developers to take the 18 acres where is all retail now and convert it into retail. In fact, this same group is the plaza that we're going to create. We've studied Main Street many times because everyone really likes how that turned out. But we're going to add life sciences, 500,000 feet, and another 1,000 apartment units. And the retail will probably be 100,000 feet. I'm also a consultant on the Rise in Cupertino that Sandhill is in the build. And another project that I mentioned is I'm involved in Stone Ridge Mall in Pleasanton, and I'm leasing the J.C. Penney space while this mall goes through a number of changes that is kind of representative of certain malls around the United States and in Northern California. So anyway, you might have questions on some of those projects or you're familiar with them, but those are ongoing, and some are in entitlement, some are actually leasing. So let's jump to the big picture. So national vacancy is reaching pre-pandemic levels. That's a good thing. After the Great Recession in 2010, the retail industry took a great hit and developers were slow to build again. Tenant expansion slowed and brick and mortar was challenged by online sales. And many US markets, retail markets, were overbuilt. During that time period, people thought brick and mortar wouldn't survive, or if it did, what would it look like? Then retail development was further hampered in 2020 when the pandemic led to widespread retail shutdowns. And today, retail development is being set back by, which everyone is reading about, high inflation, higher interest rates, and construction costs. And construction costs are not only serious in the retail development area, but certainly in all the other disciplines. Good news, Cyber Monday, which everyone's familiar with, was the biggest online shopping day of the year in all time. And what the drivers was the early discounts by you name it, electronics, appliances, apparel, but that's what got people to go online and purchase things for Christmas. Black Friday was a record weekend as far as shoppers, and we don't have, which is brick and mortar, so we don't have any feedback on exactly the increases over last year for this year. Okay, so now just real quickly, who survived and thrived during the pandemic? Well, number one, grocery stores. I think who didn't go to Costco during the pandemic? Off-price apparel, you might find that interesting, but Ross, Burlington, TJ Maxx, and Marshalls did very well, and were actually opportunistic to try to grab new space. Sporting goods did well. Dick's Sporting Goods had a lot of inventory and has come up with, and I'll get into it later, with some new concepts that they're exploring. Outlet stores obviously did well. Home improvement, Lowe's, Home Depot, cosmetics, crafts, Marshalls, and Hobby Lobby. Who suffered the most? Well, certainly restaurants. We were all familiar with that. One great example was in Cupertino. If you had some outdoor seating, then that helped you at least keep some activity going and your numbers. Lazy Dog did a great job at Main Street during the pandemic. Theaters obviously suffered. The good news about theaters is that they are starting to come back. There's been quite a bit of consolidation. Regal, one of the largest, is in bankruptcy, but Cinemark and AMC and some other theaters are now vying to take over their space. So that we think the entertainment industry thinks that by the end of this year, we will have reached 80% of 2019 numbers. But a lot of it has to do with content and what Hollywood's producing. There are some blockbusters coming out, Avatar, some other ones. So I think that's going to be very helpful. But there is a resurgence in that business. People wanted to go back to theaters once they knew it was safe. And especially now that theaters have added the dine-in element and made it more of an experience. Fitness got hit hard, whether you were 24-hour fitness or whoever you were, to survive the pandemic, you would have had to go back to the landlord and ask for rent relief. And maybe the landlord would have said, okay, we'll give you rent relief, but we might extend your term too, so we could get you back to what your market rent was. So retail development trends. And again, these are development trends. So malls have transformed themselves into mixed-use lifestyle centers. And customers going to malls for shopping and the experience. Now, a couple examples. If you've been to Hillsdale Mall, San Mateo, you can see, you had an enclosed mall, and then Sears, the opportunity came up where you could take Sears and redevelop that end of the center. And they made it open air. They added a theater, Sinopolis, and they added Pinstripes, which is kind of on the forefront of what we're all going to see in the near future of different entertainment venues. And they could go from indoor golf to indoor soccer. I mean, it's amazing, some of the concepts that, I mean, you could actually have indoor cricket if you wanted it too. Valley Fair did a good job in their expansion in that, that when you go to Valley Fair, you feel like you're in the Pentagon. It's just this massive indoor shopping mall. And to digress for a second, we characterize malls as A, B, and C. Certainly Valley Fair is an A mall. The C malls are all gone. The B malls, which would be something like Stone Ridge, which is it's in trouble. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see Nordstrom close, Sears close. I'm going to release JCPenney. So the only department store left is Macy's, with a Macy's store and a men's store. Valley Fair, what they did in their redevelopment, of course, they added Bloomingdale's, which was a big plus, but they did a good job on the open air area. And Italy is a big addition to that center as far as drawing people and experience. And some of the restaurants which aren't open yet will also draw a lot of people. My offices are in Santana Row, so I experience this project and what it's like every day. So who are the new anchors for retail development? Well, certainly everyone would want a grocery store because that's everyday needs. It's 24/7. But the other anchors that we're seeing are entertainment venues, like I mentioned before, and restaurants. I mean, and Valley Fair did a good job of it. And look at the restaurants that are at Main Street. The other retail box vacancies are low. Rick was just mentioning that PGA Superstore just opened they backfilled the space in Cupertino. Is that Sunnyvale, Rick? I don't know. It's right on the border. But what we've found in the last couple of years is that the empty boxes that we've had, because Orchard Supply went out of business, Toys R Us, Babies R Us. I mean, a lot of retail box tenants went out of business, but most of those have been backfilled. And the reason is that, number one, typically they were very good locations, and number two, they were at lower rents, so you weren't dealing with new construction. And who took those spaces? Again, the off-price retailers. When we were in COVID, Ross and Burlington were very active, not only here, but there was more box vacancy in the Central Valley than there was here in the Bay Area. Certainly ethnic and promotional grocery, Ranch 99 took locations, Grocery Outlet, which is promotional, took some, Sprouts took some, and now fitness is making a comeback, and they're going to tweak. They're going to have more classes than just the Fitness 19 approach. Furniture it survived and is coming back. I mean, you probably have seen Living Spaces, At Home, Ashley's Furniture. Living Spaces, if you go to Oak Ridge down on Blossom Hill, that Sears got replaced by Living Spaces, Ranch 99, and Fitness. And one of those is on a second level, which is very, very tough to lease. So another topic is, how did the pandemic alter retail design? Well, this is ongoing, and it's across the board with all retailers. Big box retailers are revamping their store formats, and for the most case, they're all downsizing. The period of time where grocery stores thought they had to be 50, 60,000 feet are gone. The largest grocery store probably even planned right now is maybe 30. Now, this doesn't include Costco, but the electronics stores, I mean, who's left really other than Best Buy? They've downsized. They've even gone to the point where now they have outlet. They're looking for outlet stores. Some of that Dick's Sporting Goods was looking for an outlet store. Part of that was the buildup in the pandemic of inventories that now are out of season and they have to get rid of them. So we're seeing, the other thing that we're seeing a lot of is to survive or to push sales as a store within a store. And you've seen it with, well, Best Buy would bring in Apple, they bring in other appliance manufacturers, and that has helped their overall sales volume. Department stores have started to do it. You've seen Sephora go in, well, they started with Pennies and now they're moving on into Kohl's. Kohl's is going to be an interesting retailer to study because their format was big stores, 80,000 feet. And I think they have a test store that they just opened in Tacoma, Washington, which is about 35,000 feet. So we'll see how the sales do there, but they could be moving forward with much smaller stores than what their original format was. Macy's is exploring two concepts, one called Backstage, which was kind of an off-price, and another one is called Macy's Marketplace by Macy's. Now, Marketplace by Macy's, and there are only 2 or 3 of these in the country. The concept there was to go to secondary markets where there wasn't a full-line Macy's store and to introduce that populace to see what a small full-line Macy's store could be. So that's ongoing. Bloomingdale's has come out with a smaller concept called Bloomies. There's only 2 or 3 of those. And a lot of these are still probably in the testing case to see how their sales per square foot and margins work out. Dick's Sporting Goods has been active in that they have a new concept called Public Lands, which is their answer to REI. They've opened about 4 or 5 of those in cold weather climates. We're hoping they get to California. I think they will. They also have another concept called House of Sports. And again, this is what you see in entertainment or you see in other retailers. I mean, for example, a new furniture store from New Zealand just opened in San Francisco. It's called Coco Republic, and they have a restaurant in the furniture store. So you can see there's a lot of evolution of the format of the store. But in the case of Dick's, the House of Sports includes a gym, an outdoor track, where you could test the shoes that you buy. There's none of those open in the West, but they're looking at doing that. The other thing that happened that's huge now, and no surprise to anyone, is on online shopping has helped many retailers, but delivery and curbside pickup are really the saving grace. I mean, you can't, if you were planning a Target today or even Ulta Cosmetics, you have to plan for parking spaces for pickup. We never had that before, but that's a big part now of their format. And then they have to design the store around that too, as to, whether they have delivery space right there. We talked about restaurants. One thing we learned about the pandemic is you better have outdoor seating. We're blessed in California that that's easy to do. You've seen so many streetscapes in Northern California, whether it's Walnut Creek, Dublin, Pleasanton, Los Altos, or wherever. What do you do now that restaurants are doing well, but you still have that outdoor parking? That's another, I'm sure that would be a long discussion with a lot of the people on this call that are in city government. Fulfillment, let's talk about that for a minute. One of the things that Target is doing is they are now allocating, they've got to compete with Amazon, and they've got to compete with Walmart. So they're now taking some of their space within the store, or in the case of a new store, where they're going to have fulfillment there versus which gets them a quicker delivery time than the giant warehouse, maybe 30, 40 miles away. We know that we don't have the same parking requirements in a center that we used to have. And a lot of that is due to, because of, if you're planning a center, it's, where's Uber and Lyft, and where are they going to do their drop-offs and their pickups? So let's talk about the kind of tenants that we're seeing today, where there's activity. And number one, we're in the medical field, we're seeing a huge push there. And to name the two top contenders right now in the Bay Area are One Medical and Carbon Health. This is a great use for a center, and it draws in people. The concepts, I think, are fantastic. I mean, basically, you're signing up for, you pay a year fee, but you actually get in to see somebody in a relatively short amount of time. The automotive industry is going through a huge transition, and it's going to be interesting with EV vehicles, how they're going to market themselves. A good example was, obviously, Tesla was the first one to come out, and they were here in Santana Row, and for the brand identity and actually to get people, interested in the product. But Valley Fair has added Lucid, Polestar, Rivian for showrooms. So those are the first EV showrooms. Now, the problem with those automotive uses is they also need, and I'm sure you've seen them in some of your communities, they need a service component for people to go to for service. And those have been difficult to find, and still have some brand identity. So restaurants we're seeing a lot of growth in restaurants, especially if you have a space, we call it a second gen, meaning it was a restaurant that went out and it has a hood. Those spaces will probably be the first to lease up. We also know that, that the restaurants that had drive-throughs were very important. And to that end, we're now seeing chains like, and I'm facing this in Dublin, where Panera now wants a drive-through, Chipotle wants a drive-through, and it's very difficult because of the queuing, as everyone knows, to find those kind of properties. But that's what they're looking for. We've the ghost kitchens. There's a couple chains going around the Bay Area to secure a ghost kitchen, excuse me, where they have 8 to 10,000 feet, and they'll have Domino's. It's all takeout for the food uses, and it could be pizza, it could be sandwiches and whatnot. Apparel, we're obviously seeing the interest in resale. tread up other ones. And we're also seeing the interest in resale with existing retailers. A case in point is REI, where they, and Dick's Sporting Goods, where they're talking about within the store, or maybe in close proximity, they would have you could come in and resell equipment that you had, and they would then put it on the market. Fitness, we talked about. We're seeing, I think the biggest one you're seeing the change is in City Sports, which was LA Fitness, and their new concepts called Club Studio, which seems to be where a lot of those, now in COVID, that was about the worst thing you could have, is a studio and 30 people showing up at one time. So, but this is kind of the direction they're going in. And we're seeing some smaller ones, like Equinox is going to franchise a concept called Blink, which is an Equinox fitness club is typically 40 to 50,000 feet. Their Blink concept would be 10. So it's getting closer to where people live. We talked about entertainment, the golf concepts, indoor putt shack. There's 2 or 3 competitors, and typically they're 25 to 30,000 feet, but they're not only work for the family at certain hours. When their bar clicks in, then you have to be certainly over 21. The other one that we're seeing some movement is digitally native brands, which is a company that was basically an online company only, who then decided that they needed brick and mortar. I mean, the examples of those are Warburg Parker and Allbirds, Casper. But those are going, if those happen, they're going to very select locations where they've identified their exact demographic. Abbott Kinney down in Santa Monica, maybe even Santana Row for that matter. Let me move on to challenges for retail leasing brokers. I mean, there's many, but I'm just going to mention 2. Because of the changes in retail, and who is active, and it's just changed so dramatically. A lot of existing zoning in cities were set up to just generate sales tax, and that's not the case today. Because in today's world, we've got medical, we've got personal service, which could be a salon. I mean, Sola is a good example. If you go look at Sunnyvale Town Center, they took, a good space, maybe 10,000 square feet. So having the flexibility to be able to mix, it's all about getting people to the center, and then let them cross shop. If you have the right design, then they're going to stay there longer because it's more of an experience. But it's a blending now. It's just not all specialty shops. It's just they're not there anymore. They've either been absorbed by a bigger company, or they couldn't make it on their own. The other problem we run into is, and El Paseo would be a good example, is where we have older leases with use clauses that do not allow certain other uses. I'll give you one example. In Santa Clara, when I had a vacant store, and I put in actually a 24-hour fitness, but I had to, the grocery store restricts that use. So one of the terms that that we all hate is now called waivers. And so I had to go to Lucky, I had to get a waiver. And as you can imagine, these are not free to allow that use, because their leases from 20, 30 years ago, they hated anything that might compromise their parking. So, but at the same time, grocery stores know that certain gyms like Equinox, which is high end, those people work out and then they go to the store and they go home. So, I mean, things have just changed. The other thing I thought that I would end with, just because it is kind of fun, is so what is Amazon now? So let me go through this. Number one, you know, they're Whole Foods. And we all know how successful nationally Whole Foods is. There are other grocery concepts called Amazon Fresh. And Amazon Fresh, we don't have one in the Bay Area to my knowledge. I've been to one or two, one in Tustin down in the Irvine area, and they were looking here and then they pulled back. But these are bigger grocery stores. I know earlier I said they're all 25 or 30, but these are wanted to be more in the 40 to 50 because, like I mentioned earlier with Target, they want to use this as fulfillment. But the store that I went in to shop, it's not a Whole Foods now, it's similar, but there was more people in every aisle taking orders for delivery than there really were customers. But they say they're going to keep growing this. We'll see, but in the Bay Area, it's been very, very slow. Some of that has to do with availability of space. And it's pretty doubtful that you're going to see a ground up development for one of those. So they typically have to take an existing building, and maybe it's even an industrial building that they could convert. Amazon Books, gone. And that was the other thing that was interesting with Amazon, because they had two concepts. They had one called 4-Star. They opened one up on Burlingame Avenue, and you know the bookstores. We have one here in Santana Row. But when the sales aren't there, they will pull the plug fast, and that was like overnight. Both those concepts were gone. They have a new concept called Amazon Style. Now, this is what's interesting about this is their entrance into apparel. They opened the first one in a Rick Caruso Center. You might have read about him. He was running for mayor of LA. And this is a different format. I mean, you go in, it's basically, you have to have your phone. There's a source code, there's a display. You immediately identify what you like and then you'll be told whether they have the size, and then you go to a changing room and it's there. So leave it to Amazon to kind of come up with a new concept of how to shop for apparel. But this is the only one open on the West Coast. It might be the only one in the US. You've heard of Amazon Go. That's basically, in my opinion, their answer to 7-Eleven. And then they just came up with another one the other day called Twice Daily, which is it's kind of a snack shop that you'll find in a sports venue. So it's kind of interesting what Amazon and what they're doing and what they're planning on and what's next. Rick, I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Jim. Are there any questions? You can ask them in the comments section or raise your digital hand. I know I've got I had I knew I had some questions coming into this, but I even have more now that, Jim, you've been throwing food into the hamsters and they're gone now. Oren.
Yeah, well, you said you're consulting for the Rise. What do we see happening there from a retail point of view?
Well, the Rise, as you know, the mix is, residential, I think 2,200 units, and the office component. The retail component is about 450,000 square feet. And that's in phase one. But it's the concept is to have a merchandising mix that has zones that kind of work in a Main Street way around a iconic plaza, which is, I think, exceptional. So you'll have entertainment, you'll have everyday needs, you'll have anchorability, which would be more on the Stevens Creek brand identity size. And then you'll have some streets that are unique specialty stores, pattern after Abercrombie. I keep mentioning that, but people know about that, or Chestnuts, or Berkeley over in that area. So that's kind of the concept, and you got to start kind of with the bigger spaces, which would be entertainment, certainly food. Restaurants will be huge, but and if you've studied the plans, the locations will be dynamic, absolutely dynamic. And then the other one would be, figuring out the anchorability.
Hung.
Yes, thanks for the presentation. Yeah, more questions. When you say entertainment, what do you mean? Because when I see entertainment, I'm thinking maybe a small stage for local artists to perform or that attract. So what do you mean by entertainment?
Well, it's not Chuck E. Cheese or Pizza Time Theater. It's an experience. It's and a lot of it is patterned around an activity, and the golf concept, which is now, I mean, if you look at, well, I mentioned Pinstripes, that's bowling. Have you been there up in San Mateo?
No.
We haven't. We had what was our Bowmore had
Yeah, Beaumont. Yeah.
Kind of an entertainment. They were at Valco for a while. They held on for a while as long as the building was standing.
Well, they're still there, Rick.
Okay. Well,
Well, you need to lead us on a field trip.
yeah, there you go. The next thing.
We need to put a
Okay.
field trip together.
But
So
Yeah.
the next question is, what can the cities relax some rules for the entertainment to be more attractive? How can the city help?
well, I think the city needs to relax the rules on shop leasing, where you allow medical, you allow educational. I mean, everything isn't just going to be based on sales tax. It's Crumble Cookies. Have you been to Crumble Cookies yet? You will when we open in El Paseo, but they're not cheap. But your question about entertainment is an activity, and it can be typically it's like I've mentioned, golf, darts, and if you see some of these around the country, from Boston to New York, and a lot of them are in Texas. It's the kind of thing that doesn't exist here. That's why it's important for the Rise, because it'll be a destination that there's no competitor to it. But they're usually in bigger sizes, so it's not like you're going to have a 1,200 or 2,000 square foot entertainment space.
Right. No,
I
I
mean,
think this is great. I think even even though if the price even at higher, most people will still go because like you said, they're looking for experience. So I'm hoping it's not just restaurant and shopping. It has more entertainment. I love the idea. And so I actually think if they have like permanent stages where a little jazz band can play, not to attract people to go there, that would be great.
Yeah, well, look at the Target at Main Street. I mean, there's a lot of entertainment uses that would like to go there. And that's a bigger space. That's probably around 20,000 square feet. So you'll see more and more of it as we go along. And they, as I mentioned, they're going to be the anchor of tomorrow.
And then Bill, I'm going to call on you next, but I wanted to throw in one of the things we've been looking at is the outdoor seating through the pandemic has been very successful. And before the pandemic and arguably after, Cupertino has no more than 20% of your restaurant seating can be outside. And talking with staff and other people, no one knows why that is or where that number came from. But Cupertino's got great weather, and certainly I think most restaurants would love to have much more outdoor seating than just 20%. Bill, you're next.
Oh, Jim, there's something that I kind of found interesting in your comments, that Target is creating a fulfillment center in their stores, or a space within their stores. So can you elaborate a little bit on that, on what's kind of the thinking behind it, and what's the advantage that they see versus Amazon?
Well, as you know, Amazon has been very successful on the larger fulfillment centers. In the case of Target, well, I'll give you an example. In Dublin, we're talking about, it's an existing store. They want to expand that store by another 10,000 feet. And we said, well, how are you going to merchandise that? And they said, it's going to be fulfillment. Now, the store in Cupertino, it probably doesn't have it, but this is fairly new. And in a lot of locations, you can't expand. But it's just, how do you get deliveries closer to customers? I mean, yeah. Whole Foods has the same issue. All the grocery stores do.
Bill, you had said something about moving away from I guess the 1960s idea of retail. You have your Sears, your JCPenney's selling merchandise and generating sales tax. With everything that's going on, what's a new definition that we need to be looking towards? I mean, retail's been changing. It's been changing for a long time. Over my shoulder is a chamber offices, used to be a 7-Eleven. We're a non-compliant use, I have to confess. But how can we guide public policy with a new definition of retail? And what do you think that definition would need to include?
Well, it needs to include a lot of flexibility because of the unknown. And parking requirements have changed. So you don't have to be overly protective of that. I mean, in Cupertino, I think a fitness store has a whole different, well, you have the vacant Sprouts there. And so to put a fitness use in there, and yeah, you'd probably like to replace it with a grocery store. But if that's not reality, and a fitness store wanted to get it, I think that's 7 per 1,000 parking. So it's a different requirement than it would be whether it was grocery or someone else. But I think the key is, and I don't really have the answer to that. I mean, maybe there's some other cities that have kind of, I can tell you one that's really been restrictive is Palo Alto. And as what they would let Town and Country do. And it's been difficult to lease that space, especially because the space is, we've all seen it. It was the old town and country style. So it doesn't have the high ceiling cube space that you would build today. That's what people want, whether they want to have an open ceiling or they want to have a drop ceiling. But so that's the evolution.
Do you have any insights into why is it Unibail Westfield is selling all of its US malls?
Well, it's an international company. I think what they've done is they've pruned away the C malls and probably some of the Bs, and I would think they would hold on to the A malls, which certainly Valley Fair is. I mean, as far, if you're a new retailer and you're coming into the Bay Area and you're looking at the South Bay, the first thing you're going to do is, okay, where's Stanford, where's Valley Fair, and where's Santana Row? That's where you start. And because they're all so successful. If you go to the East Bay, you're talking about Broadway Plaza and Walnut Creek. And there's some other hybrids from that. But those, I mean, if you go to Stanford, I mean, they're building the Restoration Hardware store, which will have the restaurant on the roof, which is an exciting store. If you, there's one open in Cupertino, but a great concept. And I mean, so if you're a furniture high end, I didn't get into kind of the high end because that's really not kind of the world that I deal in. But if you're going to be luxury, first things you're going to look at are those three centers.
Right. Other questions? Other comments? The Westgate is a B or C mall?
Well, Rick, I don't even know if I'd call it a mall. But if you go back in history, and actually I sold it once, but what happened is you had all that interior space. So, but you didn't have enough traffic to draw people through there, and you still had the, I mean, if you look at it, originally you had Penny's on one end and you had Ward's on the other. Well, now the Ward's is a Target. I can't imagine a mall anywhere that if they're going to replace an anchor store, you would definitely want Target on your list. But, and then they were fortunate to break up the JCPenney on that end, but there's still, so what the concept became, okay, let's create these box retailers all the way around, and there's not much we can do for the interior because it's just an archaic design. A lot of what happens in a lot of malls of that age is you put a street right through the middle, comes out the other side, and you might even have a second street that goes through it because you have to open it up, you have to create open air, and then you come up with taking bigger space and being able to, you know, maybe you have a 5,000 and a 6, so you can merchandise mix so differently, especially in a location like that where you're drawing from San Jose and Saratoga. I mean, that's a really good district.
Great. Other questions for Jim? Well, super. I really appreciate your spending your Friday afternoon with us, Jim. It's an topic area where there seems to be an awful lot going on. And after your presentation, I think we appreciate there's even more going on than we can see, but you live with it every day. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and you know what, Rick, I might end with one thing, is that retail development now falls under mixed use because you're not going to build ground up retail. You might build a single entity, maybe it's a restaurant or something like that. But typically, development going forward is going to be a mix of residential. It could have office and it has retail. Those spaces, when we first saw mixed use hit the South Bay, probably 10 years ago, it was an afterthought how the retail space functioned, but it was a city requirement. But it wasn't really marketable, and it didn't have the proper parking. So unfortunately, a lot of those mixed use projects, it was great for the residential, the apartments or condos or whatever, but that ground floor was a problem.
Yeah, the design seems to be key. Well, thank you, Jim. It's obviously something we're going to be working on for quite a while, and considering the life cycle for some of these projects that you're dealing with, we're going to be talking about this for many years to come.
Yep. Okay, well, thank you,
Right.
everyone.
Well, thank you, Jim.
Thank you.